This podcast is brought to you by Archimed, fast and focused design and manufacturing.
I'm Greg Maurer, founder and owner of Archimed.
And I'm Caroline Squatrito, talent engagement specialist. We are on a journey to grow, learn, and gain expertise in small to mid-size company culture. Join us.
Well, Caroline, who's our special guest today?
Greg, today is really special for me. As our listeners know, we are interviewing some special dads in our lives for Father's Day. And so for me, I got to interview my dad, Jim. He has a degree in civil engineering from Villanova, but really he spent most of his career in business in different management positions. And for most of my life, he has been involved in turnaround work. So he has shared with me all about the variety of cultures that he has experienced. And yeah, I'm excited to learn more.
Great. Let's listen in.
All right. This week on the Culture Thesis, as you know, we are working our way through our Father's Day series. So I am joined today by my own dad, Jim. And I think that the best introduction would be if he just kind of told you a little bit about himself. So Dad, why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. And I'm assuming most of the listeners know Caroline, so I'll tell you I am Caroline's dad, and that may be all you need to know about me if you know Caroline. But and from a business point of view, in addition to being Caroline's dad, and maybe even before I was Caroline's dad, I've done a lot of work in a number of different companies, trying to help them be more successful, I guess is the best way to put it. And more recently, that's been the primary focus of what I do. And some would say I do a lot of turnaround work, but all geared to trying to get companies to stand on their own 2 feet.
So Dad, I know that you started as a civil engineer and you went to Villanova. What happened after that? I mean, you were in the Navy for a bit, and then what, you transitioned to management at some point?
Yeah. So, and Villanova, by the way, is still in the, as of today, the next game is tomorrow. They're still in the tournament, which is wonderful to see.
Yes, we're recording this on March 26th.
Yeah,
so.
For all you Villanova fans out there, please take note. And Butler, a competitor in the Big East Conference, isn't. But I wish they were in more than I wish Villanova was in, to be fair. But yeah, so I went to Villanova. I studied civil engineering. However, I really didn't work very much as a civil engineer. The closest I came to it was in the Navy. I was a civil engineer and worked in the Civil Engineer Corps. Many adventures that I can talk about or not talk about here, traveling to distant lands and so forth, and working on construction projects that honestly, from my point of view, were a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the construction business. Then I went to graduate school. Then I came out and started working an engineering guy with a master's in business to try to go learn about business. And to be honest, I had no clue what business was about when I started. But I learned, and I have done lots of different things along the way.
So I know that you've been with a lot of different companies. As you just said, you've had a lot of different experiences. How have those experiences kind of influenced your perspective on business culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. I learned a lot. I was fortunate early in my career. After I finished business school, I went to work for a company called TRW. And today, if you're familiar with it, it's all automotive focused. But when I joined, it was a mix. It had an automotive business and a space and defense business. So lots of different things to plug into. And it was a company at the time that was very, very, very plugged into culture. A lot of companies were. Hewlett Packard was one that I remember we did a lot of comparisons with. And the big thing at the time was culture. You don't hear about it so much today, but you did in those days, and companies actually focused on it. And so I was in an environment where um, the company had a strong push on having the right culture. And because of the way they hired me, I came out of graduate school, and TRW was one of the companies that had a development program for new hires out of graduate school. So I was in a program where I was exposed to lots of different things early, including lots of leadership and development type training, as well as when I was in the Navy. I mean, I picked up a lot on leadership when I was in the Navy, because as a kid, you're coming out of college and you go in and you have 100 people looking at you saying, what do I do today, kind of a thing. So you have to have some ability to lead and manage. So I carried that from the Navy into TRW, built on it in TRW. And to be honest, it was something I was always very interested in. I mean, I was always interested in why some organizations do well, and some organizations don't do so well. What really makes a difference? We all buy the same machines. We all buy the same supplies, materials, and so forth. The thing that we really can do different, and I learned it early, was the way, what I call how we manage. We can change the way we manage and manage differently. And the way we manage, and culture is a part of that, can be a real competitive advantage. And I think for me, I was fortunate to see the value of that early in my career, and then I use it going forward. I mean, I think as a person and for the companies I'm with, we really focus on managing better, and that's a deep topic that we can get into. But I think the key message is management can be a competitive advantage, and I learned that. Culture can be a competitive advantage, and I learned that too.
So, Dad, you mentioned that you don't think companies focus on culture as much today, which is interesting to me because I mean, as you know, I don't know if we've told the listeners or not yet, but I interned at Archimed when I started my junior year at Butler, and then I graduated, and I've never left them. So while I interned at a couple of other places, they've really been my big influence, and I feel like we've always had some focus on culture, and certainly more within the past couple of years. But where was the shift for you? Because now it sounds like maybe not everyone is as focused on culture, or maybe not as much as they once were.
Yeah. So when I say companies were more focused on culture, it was something that was talked about. Lots of stuff was published on it at the time. There were a couple of books that have become very famous that were written about America's best companies, and so I didn't mean to say that companies today don't focus on culture, because I think they do, but I think the depth and the perspective they have about culture has probably changed. So today, culture tends to take on a lot about the work environment. And I don't sense that it takes on as much about how we manage. And the environment when I started at TRW was very much about how we manage, how teams work together, how teams work effectively, how that culture that we build internally affects our customers, affects our suppliers, and the way we do business and the way we're perceived. And and today I don't hear so much about it. So it's possible that everybody has just built on the lessons we learned in companies when I started working, and it's just a thing that everybody takes for granted today. But I honestly don't see it as an area of emphasis so much. Not to say it's not there, it's just not out there being talked about. Academics aren't publishing as much about it. So maybe one conclusion could be everybody's already figured it out and it's not the important thing anymore. But I think it really is the important thing for the reasons I mentioned earlier. It really comes down to how we manage and how we interface and interact with people, and people internally, people externally, our customers, our suppliers, our employees.
So, yeah, what you're saying is lining up a lot with what Greg and I have talked to a lot of other leaders and experts about. And that, at the end of the day, culture is heavily influenced by leaders. And it's much more influenced by what leaders do and how they do things, and not so much what they say. And then, of course, if what they're saying isn't lining up with what they're doing, there becomes a problem there. And that can lead to kind of a corrupt culture. Um, what do you do when you're with a company to make sure that you're facilitating a healthy culture, or the culture that that organization needs?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In what I've been doing lately, and I've done a lot of them, it's more turnaround work or getting companies to significantly improve the way they operate and excuse me, the results they deliver. And so I mentioned earlier that I've always been very interested in why some companies do well and have done well, and why some companies don't. Right. So when I walk in companies, the other piece of it is, when I walk in companies, I'm always curious. They're usually in trouble somehow, some way. They're in trouble because their investors aren't happy, their lenders aren't happy, the people there aren't happy, right? Their customers aren't happy. So I walk in and I'm always trying to figure out, how did this happen, right? How did this get the way it is? And ultimately, it comes back to people and what they did and why they did it and how they were thinking about the business and how they were performing and how they were interacting with others. You just mentioned a key word about alignment. And you can say all the things you want, but if the way you operate and the way you behave and the way you interact with people isn't lined up with what you're talking about, everybody sees right through that, right? And so I've seen a number of instances where people talk all the talk and it sounds great. It's almost like they got a script from somebody about all the right things to say, but they completely miss it on the behavior side. Nobody gave them the script on the behavior. They can't go copy that from somebody else. They have to know that themselves. And so that's a reason, a mismatch between what people say and what people do, that causes cultures to fail. There are lots of other reasons companies fail, but what I try to do when I go into these situations is bring that all back to center and alignment. So I talk about what we want to do. I do what I talk about, so that people see that we're going to behave differently. And differently could be that I just talk to you, right? It could be that I just talk to everybody in the team. I talk to everybody who works there and talk about what's going on. So it's little things, but it's big things. Okay. And what I mean by that is, it's the little things that we do have a big impact on the culture. And it makes a big difference in terms of how the company performs. So what I try to do, come in, try to figure out what's happened, why it's not performing, the company's not performing the way it should be, and then get it back on track.
So you mentioned, you do a lot of turnaround work, and you and I talk about all the fun stories and what's going on with the company that you're currently at. And I've always gotten the sense that you kind of come in and you're a lot of times seen as the bad guy because, for whatever reason, you're coming into a failing company and you've been tasked with turning this company around. So I feel like you probably have to gain trust very quickly, and you're coming in oftentimes with kind of people having a bad perception of you. So how do you turn that around in order to build the trust and then get everyone on board to moving towards a more successful future?
Yeah, Caroline, I'm really not a bad guy.
I know that. I know.
I really have some good qualities. No, I'm kidding. But you're exactly right. I go into situations where it depends on the company, but in some cases, it's usually not the team that's running the company at the time that brings me in. Okay. So it's usually the investors that bring me in or the lenders that bring me in. And usually at least one member of the team that was there before I came in is gone, right? So it's always a little bumpy. So I come in, yes, and I'm viewed as the bad guy often, yes, no question. And some people will say or think, oh, well, why do you have all the answers, right, to me? And I don't, right? I never have all the answers. I tell them that they have all the answers, right? So it starts off with them looking at me wondering, what is this new kid who just walked in the door going to do that all of us who've been working here for, oftentimes years, right? And sometimes shorter periods of time. What is this new kid going to do that the rest of us have been trying to do? Why is he going to be able to do it? And they don't know, right? They look at me very, very, in a very questioning way as to what does this guy bring to the party. So it always starts off with something like that, and I have to build from there. And I build from there by saying, hey, give me a couple of weeks and sometimes a couple of months. Usually I try to get everything buttoned up in a couple of months. and let's let me look around. I'll see I'll take a look and see what I can find in terms of what I think needs to be addressed, what's going well, what's not going so well, and then we'll talk about it. And I do that. Okay, I value the team input, and I value communicating and let everybody know where they stand. And so I'll go around and I'll talk to everybody together. I'll talk to everybody individually and get their thoughts, and then I'll come back together, and without violating any confidences, I'll tell them all what I hear. Right. The thing that I find then is when I do that, first of all, I develop a different relationship with everybody because I have a chance to tell my story and they have a chance to tell theirs. But the other thing I find is they are often very frustrated with how things are going as well, right? So it's not like they don't want to fix it. It's like they don't know how to fix it, or they haven't been able to fix it. And they will talk about all the different reasons that they think might be contributing to what it takes to fix it. And the interesting thing is, I'm not one of the problems of the past. Do you know what I mean? So they'll bring up all these things about why it didn't work and who was the problem in this. And so all of a sudden, I'm not the issue anymore, right? There are other issues that they talk about. So, because I don't like being the bad guy for too long. I like to get past that stage. But to be fair, oftentimes the things that I have to do are the things that a lot of people don't like to do. And I like to get those done and behind me pretty quickly so that we can have the right team who can help sit around the table and work the real problems and get the business moving forward. But it is a challenge. Every time I walk into a new company, it's a challenge. And every time I walk into a company together, I mean, it's not just me, but I work to get past that. And I think the team that's there wants to get past it and work on the solutions rather than stay in a frustrated state. So they usually jump on board and we all work together and get stuff done.
Yeah, so I know you're aware that, a couple years ago, Archimed purchased a company, and we were really excited about it. It was kind of a similar turnaround situation. And one thing that we completely failed to consider was the conflicting cultures of Archimed and the other company, Veracity Medical. And we've talked about it a lot, and we really feel like we just completely failed at properly recognizing their culture and at kind of honoring it. And it was just too big of a gap at the end of the day from where our expectations were and where their expectations were. Can you share a story where you came in and there was just too big of a cultural gap between what you wanted and what either a specific leader or employee at that company wanted, and you just could not find a way to move past it?
Sure. That happens usually at least once in every company. And I will say that I've never encountered a company, an organization that didn't want to get on board with what we needed to do to get better. I have encountered people who didn't want to get on board. I mean, going back in time, I had a company. It was a French company, and it was a French and a Belgian company combined. And so I had two very emotionally driven cultures that were different, the Belgian culture and the French culture. And I walked in, and so there were a lot of issues around that whole thing in terms of how people worked it, because Americans are smart. They can work the edges and the cracks between two different cultures and, jockey themselves into better positions, which I don't like as part of the culture. So I was cleaning all that up. And I remember there was a time, and this isn't just an example, but there was a time when I said, okay, and the offices, offices, by the way, and the way they're laid out are a key part of the culture. And I had inherited with this company two buildings that were very old in terms of their style. Everybody had an office, everybody had a chair, everybody had their, packs of stuff stuffed in corners in their offices. It was very hard to walk in and see everybody. I like a culture that's open. We communicate openly. We share stuff openly. And so I told them after one of the things I observed, and I went back to the board and I said, look, this isn't going to work this way. I got to get all these people into one building, open and change. We got to change the way we operate. I mean, I couldn't even find people when I needed them. I'd go walking down in the building, but there's so many rooms I had to check to see if I could find them, and it just was difficult. So I ended up putting a new building in place, and most of the people got on board. But this is a funny story from my perspective as I look back, because there was one guy that came to me, and he had a nice office just like everybody else, right? And he goes, so you're going to set up this new building? Yeah. And he goes, well, I've heard there aren't going to be any offices. I said, that's true. And I said, he goes, well, I've worked hard to have my chair and have my desk and have my office. I said, congratulations, that's wonderful. He goes, don't really want to work in an environment that's not like this. I said, that's fantastic that you've reached that decision. He goes, well, if you put an office in place for me, I'd be happy to stay. I said, look, let me tell you something. We've had the discussions. We're moving forward to this kind of environment. It's going to be an open environment. If there are offices, there are very few, and they're all glass walls so people can see everybody and, reach out and touch whoever they want and communicate with whoever they want. And I said, I'd love to have you stay, but it's your decision, right? We're going to move forward. And he said, no, it's just not going to work for me. I said, fine. So he moved on, and I wish him the best of luck. So that's an example. Other times it's come to different kind of conclusions where I, after evaluating the teams, and this is part of the not such a nice guy persona that I sometimes have, but there are some people who have to be prima donnas and everything has to be done around them, and that does not work in the cultures I create either. And they have to have it their way, kind of like the guy with the chair in the office, right? Similar but different. And they just don't want to adapt or don't want to be open to looking at things differently. And it's, I have a discussion with them. They're fighting me, and I have a discussion with them. I say, look, we're all here to help the business get from point A to point B. And I'd love to have you as a part of the team. But it doesn't work if you're helping me go backwards or helping us go backwards. We just can't have that. And so after a couple of those discussions, if they don't get on board, we just go different ways. So certainly part of the job I have is to get the right people around the table. And look, it's not about having all the same people, because I want lots of different people, but certainly the one thing they have to have in common is they have to get on board with how we're going to work and get on board with the fact that we want to take the company forward. What we do to actually move the company forward, that's a collective decision, right? The things we actually go do, we work together. But the processes have to be something that everybody signs up to. So it's a key part. It's a very exciting part of what I do. It's sometimes a very bloody part of what I do, but in the end, it's a key foundation. As part of developing that part of the culture to get us to the point where we can do what we have to do.
So I like that you put the decision back on this person, and it reminds me honestly of how you raised us, because we always heard, like, no is always an acceptable answer, and it was always made very clear to us, like, if you asked us to do something and you would say, okay, so you can do it or you can't, and here's what happens if you don't, and you make the decision. And it's funny because I feel like that's so ingrained in me now. And I've brought this up with other people, and people often don't like this. I have to say, Dad, like, I don't mind employing it, but people often feel very cornered when I employ well, you have a choice here. And if you choose no, then there are just consequences. And did you learn this more through like being in business? Did you learn it through like raising us? Where did you get this whole, like, you always have a choice philosophy?
Well, that's a deeper question. I mean, along the way, as I mentioned, I mean, part of it is just the way I think, but along the way, I mentioned that there was a lot of opportunities to learn about leadership cultures, learn about ourselves in terms of how we think and why we think the way they do, and why we think the way we do, and how we react and why we react the way that we do. And part of being a leader is to get in touch with that, because you want to be able to manage through some of the tough times. So in the end, honestly, we all do make choices. We don't always recognize that we make choices, but we really do. We can choose how we feel about things. We don't have to react all the time to the way we think we should feel, right? We have a choice. And so at some point along the way, that became a stronger part of me, that we have a choice, right? We always have a choice. We can do this or not. Even stuff that I know we had discussions in Caroline, you benefited so much from all this experience, along the way, because you were exposed to this.
Yes, I do know. I feel very lucky.
Not just you, by the way, but Allison and Michael as well. Michael probably took the brunt of it more since he was the first, but you guys benefited from all this. But the thing is, we always have a choice. Even when it comes to doing something that, a lot of people say, hey, we have to do this. Why do we have to do it? Well, we have to do it because somebody said so. Okay, well, if you want to do it because somebody said so, that's your choice. And if you don't want to do it because somebody said so, that's your choice. Or what speed we drive our cars down the road, right? I mean, the law says uh, the speed limit's 30 or 40 or whatever it is, right? We still have a choice to make whether we comply with the law or not. There are consequences if we don't, and there are consequences if we do, or outcomes either way, right? So part of life and part of learning and part of us being intelligent humans and I'll say analytical humans is understanding that that's a key part of our makeup, right? So yeah, I do that. I do that with people that are in organizations that I work with, and I do that with people in general, right? We have a choice, and I think it's important to recognize that. Yeah, the other point I'll make is oftentimes when I come in and I'm the bad guy, right? And as you were mentioning earlier, during the bad guy phase, at least, people in the organization, they will want to blame things on me, right? They will say, hey, it's because of you that this happened. It's because of you that I don't have a chair, right? And so to me, that's a bad construct. And I don't really, it's not beneficial to them or me. I think the beneficial thing is, hey, they make a decision that a chair isn't so important that they want to leave the organization and go someplace else where they have a chair, right? And look, the chair, I'm exaggerating that they all would have had a chair. The thing they wouldn't have had is walls around their chair, right? They had, they were sitting in an open environment. So the chair was a different chair. I think this individual didn't like the fact that it was a different chair, but it's still a chair. So, but the point is that they have to choose what's more important to them, the chair or the office or the culture that we're creating, right? And in the end, I think the culture is important enough where we want the team members we have to be choosing to be part of the culture. That's an important piece of establishing the culture, is getting people to the point where they choose to want it as opposed to just being forced to have it. Do you know what I mean? I think that's an important differentiation to make. So yeah, one more point. So I had another experience where as I mentioned, the culture discussion and was big. Okay, when I first started working at TRW, and I was fortunate to be able to move around and do different things. And at one point, I was running a plant. You've heard a lot about it in Marshall, Illinois, and so it was my opportunity to really ingrain a culture. And I took the opportunity to heart, and I converted it. It was an organization where the previous manager had been very dictatorial and told everybody what to do every morning. Then they went and did it, and then when they were done, they could leave, kind of a thing. And I changed it all around, right? But part of the thing that I changed was I took away all the dictatorial stuff and I made it an environment. We made it an environment where everybody was self-directed, which is another concept that we can get into. But in order to stay in that environment, they had to reapply and recertify, okay, which is another interesting concept of things, right, in business, that you can't just, you have to qualify to be part of the team. You can't just be on the team because you're there, right? So you actually had to qualify, which means an active decision and an active little bit of studying. People had to actually get some skin in the game to qualify to be part of the team. So interesting points.
Yeah, I mean, I think the choice discussion works on a lot of levels because I think it just ingrains the fact that you need to be accountable for what you want and where you go and the choices that you make. And not making a decision is still making a decision. And at least, I mean, I have not been in my career for very long. I'm only 24, but I think that it's almost like empowered me to make happen what I want to happen. And it's part of the reason why I think I've been able to be successful at Archimed because um, without it, I would have just sat there and been like, well, what am I doing here? And instead I was like, well, I want to do something else and I want to take on more responsibility and I can choose to do that. I just have to do it. And I also think it gives people license to find the right solution rather than if you're presented with a problem and just kind of throwing your hands up and say, well, like, that's it. We're stuck, and not going anywhere. And instead it's like, well, are you choosing to be stuck or are you going to figure it out and find a solution? Which I think that was a big part of growing up with you was, well, there's always a solution. You just kind of have to find it and you have to figure out your way through it. So all of those long, drawn out analytical discussions with you have apparently paid off. So, so while I may have been bored at the time, I think that they they had a nice lasting impact.
Well, I had no idea you were even listening half the time, Caroline. That's fantastic. I'm impressed.
Yeah. But are there if there's like one piece of advice you want to leave me and our listeners with, what would it be?
Well, I'll tell you, when it comes to culture, a lot of it makes common sense, but a lot of it we as humans don't always think about, right? But if you take a step back and at least engage and think about it, it helps to bring a lot of this stuff to light. At least puts it on the table as a question. So I think it's important to start off from a perspective when it comes to culture, be a good human. And what I mean by that is, if you're working with people, think about both sides. There's certainly something you want to get done, and I want to get done, but there's also the impact on the person that we're trying to get on board or work with or recruit or train or whatever, right? So think about it from both sides and try to be a good human. And the other thing I would say is be curious. I mean, there are so many questions and information out there, and it helps just to start by wondering. That's with not wander with an A, but wonder with an O. Wonder why things are the way they are, and wonder what does it take to get them to be different, and have that discussion too, because it has a big impact on how we as humans think about what we do. And like you said, I mean, we have to make choices are part of it, but it's just a matter of wondering, why can't I move things forward, or why aren't things moving forward, right? It starts with that. What do I have to do differently to make it happen? So be a good human and remember to wonder. And I think that helps a lot. It takes us a long way.
Well, thank you, Dad, both for joining me and indulging me in my podcast, and also just for always being there for me and being a really good dad. I know I feel kind of spoiled to have had, or to still have you and Mom around, because I think I'd probably be a little lost without you two.
Well, we're not going anywhere. So, and it's amazing what you've picked up, Caroline. It's a pleasure to see you operating like you are. And honestly, I had no idea you were even listening.
All right. Thanks, Dad.
Okay, kiddo.
Caroline, what was it like to interview your dad? Pretty cool, huh?
It was cool. I feel like I've heard casually about a lot of this, but I've never really taken the time to dig in and ask these type of questions more than just, us conversing about the issues he's facing. So I really enjoyed it. I feel like it was a much more philosophical conversation than we normally have about these things. So yeah, I mean, I think it was a good experience, and I think he actually really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, he did. It's nice to hear a dad say nice things about their kid. I have a father and I also have children, so I can see both sides of that. So we learned a lot. I thought it was pretty cool that Jim's a turnaround guy. So when he walks into a company, it's usually in trouble. There's usually some struggles. Certainly it's not doing well. And I thought that's a pretty interesting perspective.
Yeah, as we talked about, unfortunately, he often starts as kind of the bad guy. But I think once people realize his perspective is more about the people and getting people to function well, and often that means removing obstacles for them, I think that really helps his case. And then that's what kind of kickstarts that cultural change that needs to happen.
Yeah, and he really focused on people. So, we talk about company culture as this sort of thing that layers on top of the entire company, but it all comes back to people and how they behave and how they interact with one another. I thought it was neat also that Jim focused on how we manage our people as a competitive advantage. Never thought about it like that.
Yeah, I mean, as he mentioned, he works in all different types of manufacturing companies, and they often have same technologies, same equipment, same raw material. And that one defining factor is its people. And as he mentioned, a lot of that comes down to the managers and how they lead. We've talked about this a lot. And so it's nice to hear that that's being practiced. And that's where he starts to see the change. It's not that they're using the wrong tools, it's they're not using them correctly, or they don't have the right mindset about how to operate efficiently.
Yeah, and I would like to think that we have competitive advantages in the marketplace. But I think one of the key competitive advantages, which we hope to grow and strengthen, is how we recruit and how we support our personnel. And also, as as was mentioned, how we manage them and how they develop over time. So our workforce is a competitive advantage, and that's why you and I and others invest so much in it, and that's why we're doing this podcast.
Yeah, exactly, Greg.
Well, another thing Jim pointed out that I hadn't thought of was how important office layouts are, space, how important space is. So I thought that was really interesting, and he went to bat in one of his stories about really drastically changing the office layout component of a company to improve the company culture. And I was thinking about that in our space, and whether, if you walk down one of our hallways, you'll see that there's sales and finance are in closed door, no window offices, and they're often on call, so their doors are often closed. And I thought, oh, that's sort of interesting. Maybe that's not terribly in line with our overall culture. Maybe we should think about putting some windows in there.
Yeah, I think it's an easy thing to overlook, but having that physical space being open does support that transparency. I know growing up, we were always a very transparent family. My parents didn't really try to hide things from us. They were always willing to talk about issues that we were facing. And I think that's how he approaches things at work as well. And as you mentioned, I mean, he was really wanting to have that open office, and to the point that someone decided to leave, and he was okay with that because that person wasn't in line with their mission.
Yeah, Jim's been in business for so many decades now that he's seen not only a variety of different cultures, but the evolution overall of business culture, of how business views culture. So overall, the conversation, the narrative of culture has changed quite a bit over the last 30 or so years. And Jim's observation was that today's conversation is around the cultural environment, sort of that thing, like we said, that sits over the company, but less about personal behaviors, interpersonal interactions, and how managers manage. So I thought that was pretty interesting. We do focus, you and I and others at Archimed focus a lot on creating the environment, right? The thing that layers on top. But I don't think we should lose sight of the great impact that individuals through their behavior have on company cultures, that managers have through the way they manage an impact on company culture, so that everyone's behaviors really have an impact on company culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes right back to walking the walk rather than throwing out buzzwords and putting into action the things that you care about and your employees picking up on that. And I think that's something that he has observed as being critical as he goes into, turning around these companies that he's working with.
Yeah, and because I think one of the reasons he's been successful at turning around companies is he doesn't just settle with the right script. That's not enough for him. He needs to see that script backed up by words and actions and behaviors. So he needs people to walk the walk.
Yeah, and I mean, often people that the companies that he's walking into, the people want to fix things, and it's just they don't know how, and not everyone's a change maker. And we talked about some people get anxiety about having to make that decision around change, and I think that's a very human feeling, and that's something that you have to consciously work through, because the worst thing you can do is to be a sitting duck and not make any decision.
As Jim would say, and you remember from growing up apparently, is that people can say no to a request. They can opt out. They can make a choice. They can find a different place to work. But no is an acceptable answer. So a question for you, Caroline. What was that like growing up, getting that kind of response? You expressed admiration for that kind of approach today, but you're a grown woman. When you were a kid, did you find that to be sort of annoying?
No, I always liked it because it was like he was bringing me into the conversation. And it was also like, well, if you say no to this request, there's no hard feelings. You just have to accept the consequences. And so it made me think about it. So rather than him saying, you have to do this, it was like, here's what I'd like you to do. And if you don't, let's talk about what that means. And I think that's really shaped my view on decision-making in general, and also accountability. I think that's a huge key thing that I learned, and how I learned it is that there's always consequences to decisions, and sometimes they're good. Sometimes the good things, sometimes they're bad, but you have to be willing to carry those consequences with you when you make that decision. I mean, I took his guidance growing up, and I feel like I'm still growing up, and I still take his guidance all the time. We talk all the time. And one thing that he taught me with that is there's always a solution. It's really more about having the determination and grit, and, analytical thinking to find it. And that you can't just kind of toss your hands up and say, well, that's it. You can't do anything here. There's always something you can do. And that's something that I still talk to him about things like that today. And he's always able to help me through it. So I definitely appreciate him for that.
Well, happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. I hope everyone's enjoying this special month of June and our special set of 4 Father's Day sessions. So for all the fathers out there, thanks for being such great dads, and happy Father's Day.
On our next episode, we will be joined by Archimed's business development specialist, Alicia Peck, and her dad, Tom Peck.